And that's what I say to my team. I'm like, did you really want to write that? You didn't want to write that, like that wasn't something that you were staying up at night thinking about how you could make the world's greatest SOP. Like now it's done for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Chris Parisi, and this is the AI Wave, the only podcast that combines the world of AI with the belief that Rhode Island can become the leader of this AI revolution. Today, we're welcoming another type of leader, a creative team leader, Shannon Curley. She's the head of content at Carbon 6, a tech startup based out of Toronto, and we're going to talk about content strategy. We're going to talk about what it's like to manage in teams and what it's like to integrating AI into your content marketing system. It's a really great conversation. All those content marketers, the creatives, you're going to want to listen to this. So get ready, listen up, and let's talk to Shannon. All right, welcome to the AI Wave. In this episode, we have Shannon Curley from Carbon 6. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Well, Shannon is a friend of ours at Trailblaze, and we've been working together, and she's been doing amazing work in the content marketing field. She's continually growing, and now you are head of content at Carbon 6. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Oh, how did that happen? How'd you get to there?
I don't know. I have been working in content for my entire career, but I started out as a writer. I actually started at Hasbro, which is right down the street from where we are right now, Hasbro Toys, and I was a brand writer there. After Hasbro, I went to Skyward, which is a content marketing company in Boston. Started out there doing creative operations, but then moved into a creative strategist position on their pre-sales team. Got very interested in the sales side of things, then moved from there to Thrasio, which is an e-commerce company that buys and acquires brands and then basically rebrands them and remarkets them on Amazon. And now I'm at Carbon 6, which is in a similar industry, but what we do is mergers and acquisitions of e-commerce tools designed to help entrepreneurs succeed online.
Oh, wow. So there's different jobs, different roles, different skill sets, that you have. And like for our audience, if they want to be head of content one day, right, like you, they aspire to be another Shannon. What were the skill sets and qualities that you felt were really beneficial to help you climb that ladder and grow into the head of content that you are now?
I think having a holistic perspective. So I started out as a writer, but the writing was kind of the first step, and then understanding branding and understanding that branding is kind of elevating writing to the next level. And then what do you do beyond branding? Then you're kind of looking at the brand ecosystem and you're looking at how different pieces of content play into the overall brand. And then from there, you understand how to build a brand and how to market a brand, but then how do you sell a brand? And so that was what I started doing in that pre-sales role at Skyward. And then from there, that fit really well into what I then ended up doing at Thrasio, because our whole process was buying brands and convincing them that they could trust us to take their brand to the next level. So I think it's always thinking about the long-term perspective and what the next iteration of your product would be, whether your product is a blog that then becomes, an entire blog or content site that then becomes a blog and content site that has video. And then beyond that, it grows and grows and grows. So for me, I saw my ceiling when I was in my writer role. And so I wanted to move beyond writing and do more. So I think it's having the perspective of just always growing and seeing the entire ecosystem of content, which is usually what I refer to it as a brand or content ecosystem.
It is a content ecosystem. There's a lot of pieces to content marketing. I mean, podcast is one of them. Writing is obviously a core fundamental of it all. And with you, I'm sure you have team members that have different skill sets and probably different personalities. So how is it to, motivate these individuals or help show them that there's a larger picture and kind of help create their own path, to become growing in their position?
So I think there's a few things, like always being curious is a huge one. And it's kind of a cliche, but staying curious. So for me, I like to have basic proficiency in everything that everyone on my team can do. So I can do very basic HTML and CSS coding, and I can do very basic design, and I can do very basic, video editing, because I've taken the time to take courses on all of those things and know them at least a little bit. On the other hand, there's something really important about trusting people in their expertise. So as often as possible, if there is an opportunity for me to say, well, I know what I think, but what do you think, to someone who has that particular competency or expertise, I'll do that, because one, you're probably going to get a better perspective because they really do know better than you. And two, it's going to build up their confidence that they can, argue their point and stand up for the things that they believe in. So I try to do that all the time. There's also this book called Creative Directions that's really good, and it's about specifically managing creative teams, because the creative capacity, the creative function is an inherently vulnerable one, because everything that you make as a creative is something that you're putting part of yourself into. Right. So whether you're writing, whether you're designing, whether you're making a video, it's your point of view. You're putting something out there. And so I think that's why, more than any other, operation in the organization, creatives get their feelings hurt. And there's always kind of that duality of, I think the Faulkner quote is "kill your darlings," right? And it's like, you got to get used to the idea that the things you love are going to get squashed, especially when you're creative. But you also want to empower those people to stand up when they know that their product is good. And I've had experiences with both. I know this is a really good idea, but I'm not going to fight this battle. It's fine. My darling can die. I'll bring it back some other time. I've also had the experience of, I studied this and I know that this is right and I'm going to push for it. And I do. But I think impressing upon your team that balance is really important, that there's going to be battles to fight and there's going to be battles to relinquish. And the best thing you can do to prepare yourself for both of those situations is build your confidence as an expert in your field.
No, it's well said. And you have that experience in those seats, right, that you're managing. You know what it's like. And sometimes it's natural to feel very, take things personal in a way, because you, like you said, you put your personality, you put your own self into what you're then creating to show the world. You're putting yourself out there, literally and figuratively. So having that experience in those seats, I'm sure, has been very beneficial to managing team members.
Have the experience, but also know your limitations. And I think that's really important as a leader too, is to have basic proficiencies so that you know what you're talking about, but also acknowledge when there is a limitation, and that's where you bring in the experts.
And let's talk about the team right now. And obviously, we're on the AI Wave podcast talking about how we can ride this AI wave, how we can take advantage. But also, there are some concerns when it comes to AI. And specifically, coming of head of content, what are some of the anxieties, for instance, that some of your team has been facing with AI?
So, of course, there's a lot of fear about being replaced, right? Being replaced by the robots. And I've seen that within my team. I've seen that within my friends in my community that are also creatives, whether that's designers, writers, you name it. And I think what's interesting about it is there's kind of that perspective of like, well, if a robot can replace you, then you're not good enough at your job to begin with, right? Which I think is true, but also a little harsh. I think what the concern is, especially what I've seen in my organization, is that everyone is so enamored by AI, at every part of the organization. But being enamored by it doesn't mean that you understand it. And so I think what I've definitely seen in my experience is this huge push and this huge drive to just implement AI into all your processes. It's going to solve all your problems. It's going to save us so much time. It's going to save us so much resources. And that's not necessarily untrue, but the way that that's going to happen, I don't think is understood at all levels of the organization. So what I've seen my teams be afraid of, and what I've seen my network of creatives be afraid of, is the people at the top who are asking us to implement all these things don't understand the implications of implementing at all levels. And what I mean by that is the implication is that, you can put a prompt into ChatGPT and it can spit out, an 800-word blog in 30 seconds. But is that blog going to be fact-checked? Is it going to have an executive voice? Is it going to be ownable? Is it going to have a unique point of view? Probably not. So you are still going to have to have a person's perspective and an expert perspective. So where that becomes dangerous is not only am I going to be replaced by the robot, but is the person who's asking me to do this going to think that we can produce 10 times as much because we have AI? Right. And the answer is no. We probably can produce, twice as much, given a little bit of time to get used to the process, but you can't just sub out people. And, it's funny because I said, like, as a leader, one of the things I have to know is my limitations. I think as people who are implementing AI, you also have to know the limitations of AI. So for me, with my team, it's been an interesting process of understanding their anxieties, and I really get it, and I remember when like Lensa AI came out. That was kind of the first one before ChatGPT really reared its head. But Lensa was the one where you could put in pictures of yourself and it would spit out like 40 different like avatars of yourself in different styles. And I remember when that came out, the funny thing was that one of my friends who is a graphic designer was the first person who I saw share it. And I'm like, oh, this is so cool. This is awesome. So of course I did it, free trial, great. And I did it. And then like a day later, all of my other graphic designer friends started posting. They're like, this is the worst thing that could have ever happened to our industry. This is so bad. And I hadn't thought about it that way because I'm like, this is just cool. This is just experimentation, you know? And it's both.
Right.
It is one of the scariest things for creatives because, yeah, it is doing some of the really basic things that you could do. But it's also this really fun and interesting experiment because it's not a final product. I didn't look at all of those, 40 images that got spit out and say, well, this is the best thing I've ever seen. I'm going to print every single one of them out. It's going to be my new headshot. Like, no, I didn't say that. I was like, this is interesting. I'm not going to do anything with it, but it's interesting. The thing with working with my department is that what I've had to impress upon them over and over and over and over again is that you have to play nice with it.
Right.
You don't have to make it your best friend, and you definitely don't have to make it your adversary. You do have to learn how to play nice with it.
And you gotta learn. You gotta adapt, right? And you mentioned a great point of what I call the human endpoints, right? Like it's not 100% replacing humans because you need that human expert to start. Let the prompt do the execution, and then you got to at the end. You got to edit it, perfect it, put it in the right voice, put it in your own words, make sure it's unique content and copy. So what we say is that, AI is not going to replace you, it's going to enhance you. And it will do those monotonous tasks that allows your creative team to be freed up to be more strategic, to be more creative instead of rushing to get that content out. Well, now I can have the time to breathe, really think about it, and really produce even better work than I would have been able to without AI.
And that's the same thing I say to my teams. And the other thing that I say, because in the beginning, I mean, this was only a few months ago, really, when ChatGPT and all the AI started getting rolled out, but there was so much resistance on my team. And again, I understood why, but what I kept having to say over and over and over again, because it would come up in every single meeting, it would come up in our team meetings, it would come up in one-on-ones, it would come up over and over and over again. And I finally said to them, I'm like, I am not interested in hearing how AI isn't going to work. I know that there are a lot of ways that AI isn't going to work. What I am interested in how it is going to work. I don't need you to point out all of its failures. We know them. If you put into the ChatGPT the prompt that says, what are the limitations of AI? It'll tell you.
Right.
I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is how are you going to implement this into your process to make your process more efficient so that we can do better work.
And what are some of the examples of that, for instance, of ways to implement AI into your processes for content marketing, for the creative process?
We use it for a lot of internal communications because there's a lot of things that you do internally, SOPs, standard operating procedures, things like that, where we need a process in place. We're creating a huge volume of content all the time, but there's no reason that needs to be bespoke. Put it into an AI and say, what should a normal SOP be for creating an email marketing campaign, and it'll spit that out. So we use it for a lot of stuff like that. We'll also use it, one of my favorite ways to use it actually, because we create a lot of video, is putting video into an AI and saying, pull out all the key points from the transcript. Like, that's great. That takes, something that would normally take an hour to review in a 10-minute video takes 20 seconds for it to say, here are some key points. And then we'll take that, okay, these are the key points, great. Now we can take those key points and put them back into the AI and ask them to write a blog prompt, based on the 10 key points that came out of the video. So again, it's a lot of that fundamental work that, the perfunctory fundamental stuff that you didn't want to write anyway,
Right.
And that's what I say to my team. I'm like, did you really want to write that? You didn't want to write that, like that wasn't something that you were staying up at night thinking about how you could make the world's greatest SOP. Like Now it's done for you. Now we can implement it. Now the actual final product that we're gearing towards, which is that email marketing campaign, or is that blog, or is that video, or whatever, that can be good because you have more time to work on it.
And do you feel, because like you mentioned, March 2023 was really the month where the beginning of this AI revolution, obviously AI has been around for decades.
Right.
And we all know that, and the AI gurus let us know that they've been using AI for a while. But for the most part, the March of 2023 was when things really changed at a fundamental level because of the LLMs. And you were mentioning how your team was really hesitant to deploy it, learn more about it. But now we're fast forward to whatever month we're in, about 4 or 5 months after that. Do you feel like there's been a change between March and now of how your team has responded and utilized AI?
I think it's two things. So I think one, the hype has died down a little bit. At least within our organization, there's been less. I mean, it's kind of interesting because every week in our organization, we do an AI review and people talk about how they've been using AI. And that's just kind of a nice thing to keep up to date on. But it isn't the same, like we have to do this all the time. I think it's become a more organic part of everyone's process in every arm of the organization, not just the creative team. In terms of the creative team, I think that there has been a mind shift, a perspective shift towards, okay, fine, this is doing some good things for me and I'm still doing my job. But it is funny because for me, using these tools and having other people use these tools for the last 6 months or whatever it is, or 4 months, I guess, 5 months, time is a social construct. Having people use these tools, I can now identify much easier when something is AI generated. So it's at the same time that I'm asking my team to use it in their process, I'm also like slapping their wrists and being like, hey, come on.
Right, exactly. Because you want to utilize it, right? We don't want to abuse it. We don't want it to replace us anyway. So they're kind of almost creating their own destiny they were trying to avoid.
Right.
And we're talking about the present now and we talked about the past, but let's talk about the future. Let's put on that, that Nostradamus hat. Let's look at the crystal globe or a crystal ball. And where do you see AI developing and impacting content marketing in the next, let's say, end of the year or 2024 and 2025? Like, where do you see the next big thing happening and really changing the content marketing ecosystem, as you call it?
That's a good question. I mean, I think one thing is that there's going to be a lot more content, period, because I think people are just going to start mass producing.
Pumping it out.
But I also think, and we've already seen a little bit of this, I think that, Google and other search engines and other ranking systems and algorithms are going to adapt and evolve to recognize what is being mass produced and what is being produced by robots. Optimistically, I'd like to think that there is going to be a shift towards thought leadership being more valued. I think original, unique, contextualized content will be more valuable. But I also think from a creative perspective, I think that you're really going to have to tune up your game, because the truth is that the robots can do the most basic things, though the robots are entry level, interns who didn't do the thorough research but did enough to get by. So I think, I think that people who really want to be experts in their crafts are going to have to hone those skills. And I think they're also going to have to diversify those skills. And I think they're going to have to continue to learn how to play nice.
That's a good point to make, and it reminds me of the example of when the photograph camera was invented. So before the camera, painters were extremely valuable in society because they're the ones that provided imagery of what the world was like before any cameras. Then this photograph camera thing came out and people and all the painters were all nervous that they're going to lose their jobs to this technology. Very similar to today. And what happened is that the average painters did kind of, weren't as successful, but those that really developed their craft and adapted, right? Then we started to see things like Van Gogh because it was all realism. They wanted to paint what the world was like. And then you had this shift of new styles where you had this, Van Gogh is a great example of the world didn't look like that, but in his mind, it did, and it was a shift, right? So I see things going to be like that where there's going to be another shift in how we produce content. And also, like you said, the value of thought leadership, the value of in-person meetings and content and workshops and shows and events that we can actually see and interact with real humans. Because one concern I have is how blurry that line's going to be between what is real and what is not. Like, am I an AI robot right now?
Right now.
This
is
Chris
all
Parisi?
A deep fake. Can't believe they didn't realize that.
You could have something like that, and that's like a concern is what's real and what's not. So I think that's something that we're going to have to prepare for. And like you said, just always adapt, always learn, stay on top of it, and as you say, play nice with it.
Play nice and stay curious. it's, for me, the kind of lived example has always been in my particular craft as a writer is everyone can write, but not everyone's a writer. And I think that sort of follows that parallel with, AI is that, AI can write and it can create and it can design, and it can make web pages and it can make all those things, but it doesn't mean it's a writer, and it doesn't mean it's a designer, and it doesn't mean that it, is a web developer. It can do all of those things up until a point, but you still have to be able to fine tune the craft at the end. I think we can't be afraid of it. We have to play with it.
And we can't put our head in the sand and just hope it goes away. It's not going away.
It's not going away. Again, it's like if you want to have the optimistic perspective, it's going to push everything to be better.
Yeah. I mean, that's the perspective that I want to handle, is that optimistic perspective that, we are going to be better because of it. It will take the time for those mundane tasks. It will take care of that so then we can be more strategic. We had Dr. Prashant Pal, Shay's in the back, our producer. She loved that episode 2, and he was so positive about it. It's like, now we could spend the time, solving our world's big issues that we have, whether it's health issues, whether it's global issues and climate issues, whatever it is, until those problems are solved, we'll always have enough time to work on something. Mm-hmm. So I like to have that optimistic point of view, because why not? And also, even looking at it a step further with Rhode Island, right? Mm-hmm. You're a Rhode Islander here, and we love talented folks like you that stay in Rhode Island, and we want Rhode Island to be the leader in this AI revolution. So I've called on recently to establish an AI task force. Mm-hmm. That task force at the state level will identify what are the trends, what are the concerns, how can we mitigate job loss, how can we upskill workers. Our education system, whether it's K through 12 or higher ed, they certainly have to adapt. I know they are now. They certainly have to, because you not only heard a lot of the stories about the college kids, writing all their papers with ChatGPT, but how can we include AI in the learning programs, because when they graduate, it's going to be in their work programs. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm focused on right now, to make sure that we become a leader, and if at the very least we become proactive about it, to ensure our state is in a well position for this new AI revolution. Yeah,
I think one thing that helps a lot is realizing that it's not just for the workforce, and it's you can use it in your personal life. I use it all the time in my personal life.
What are some examples?
I'm on several different boards and community groups. I've used it to generate generic job descriptions or board member descriptions for the roles, because I'm not going to write that on my own time. Right. I've used it to write letters. I've used it like complaint letters, I need to file a complaint because Southwest canceled a flight, but I don't feel like putting the time in to type it. So, hey, this is what happened, type me a letter. All kinds of things. I've used it. It can create tables. I've asked it to create pros and cons lists for me of things, compare movies, things like that, compare, the remake of this with the original of that, and it'll tell me all the key differences. It's fun. I think that's the thing to keep in mind, is that as much as there is fear around it because the robots and whatever, you can also just play with it. And I know I've said the term play nice over and over again, but also just play with it. It's fun. I think you demystify a lot of the fear around it if you just kind of engage with it and see that it's interesting. And it's crazy. I've forced several friends of mine who haven't touched AI at all because of the fields that they work in to just sit there and watch me as I'm like, okay, watch this. Yeah. Look what I'm going to make it do. And then I'll type a prompt in it. It spits out whatever, and their minds are blown. And that's it, right? Like fascination and fear are kind of two sides of the same coin. And I think if you choose to be fascinated by it, then it's something you can work with instead of running away from.
That's a great point. I mean, I love to use it personally too, whether it's, something like to make yourself better with diet programs or workout programs, or, just to have more fun. I remember I was just trying to ask it about the Star Wars chronological orders and just catching up on some content. I was like,
but it is OTPTST.
Yes.
That's the orders now.
I know, but I was like, all right, well, what happened with Clone Wars, and how did that fit into that?
Yeah, how did that factor in? Where did Rebels come in? I got it.
I mean, it was just, you could definitely have fun with it. So I love how you mentioned that, Shannon. So I love that. Yeah, so let's now talk about Advice you would give to aspiring content marketers. Let's think about those high school seniors, those college students that see AI hovering over them. They may be utilizing it to cheat on their papers for now, but they know it's going to be part of the workforce in the near future. What type of advice would you give them, whether they're content marketers or just in general?
So I'm going to give the very pedantic finger wagging answer first, which is if you use AI, if you use ChatGPT to write your papers, you're only robbing yourself of that knowledge.
Listen to that, children.
Kids. But also, it's if you're all working off the same prompt, you guys, and you're putting it all into ChatGPT, your papers are going to look the same. There's going to be ways, and I'm certain that this is already being developed if it's not already out there, but I'm sure that the colleges are going to have ways to see if it is created by ChatGPT. Because kids, ChatGPT is a predictive language model, which means that it's just pulling existing information off of the internet and putting it in a stream of words, which means it is plagiarized, and it's really easy to see that it's plagiarized. It's funny because my mom, as you know, my mom and I host a podcast, but my mom just got her PhD today, actually.
Oh,
Good job.
congrats.
Yeah, I know. But she's concerned about it, because she's a professor and she teaches, and she's always saying, are they going to use this? Am I going to be able to know? I'm like, you're going to be able to know.
Yeah.
Don't worry. You're going to be able to know.
There are tools out there. We were just talking to some folks in the higher ed that will be able to detect, so that one semester that college students
I hope you enjoyed that. It was like the COVID semester where everyone passed because they felt bad,
Right.
You got one, but no more.
What's the name of the podcast? Let's let our audience know.
Totally different subject matter.
Yes.
Sex Ed Debunked, also produced by Trailblaze. It is a cross-generational podcast that I host with my mom, who just got her PhD at UConn in human sexuality. So check it out if you want something completely different.
No, it's a great podcast. You guys have been doing a while. And how many podcasts now? I mean, how many episodes have you done so far?
Oh, gosh.
Over 60, I believe?
Well over 60, and we're about 200 downloads away from 20,000 downloads.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow.
Cranking it out.
Insert clap audio over that.
Exactly. AI that in. Thank you. But yeah, so that's my first thing is, just the kind of, hey, don't, again, cutting corners, right? We talked about it, but if you cut corners, you will be noticed. You can't get away with it.
You're not going to grow as an individual.
Right. So that's my sort of, arms crossed, think about what you've done sort of response. The positive response, though, is to embrace it. And, well before I was using AI in my professional life at all, like I said, I have always just been curious. And so I took a coding boot camp. I've taken basic design courses. I have Figma and I just play around in it. I play around in Canva, design studios. I'm not a designer, but I like to do it and I like to challenge myself to do it. One of my favorite sort of one-off freelance projects that I've ever done was when I was laid off during COVID, actually. And I ended up doing work for this nonprofit. And when they hired me, I was just a writer, doing some writing on the side. And then progressively, they started asking me to take on different things. They're like, well, can you write web copy? Sure, yeah. Well, can you create, a spreadsheet that has this, that, and the other thing and has these formulas in it? Yeah, I guess I can. Can you do this presentation deck? Yeah, all right. Can you do this web page? Yeah, yeah. And that for me was such a fun experience of just, sure, why not? I'm laid off. It's COVID. I have the time. I can learn how to do all those things. I can fake it till I make it. And I did. And I was able to come out of that. It was about a 3-month contract, I think. And I was able to come out of that and say, yeah, I can put that on my resume now that I have, experience building presentation decks. I've built experience building web pages. I have, experience in all these different things. And that's where a robot isn't going to replace you. Diversify your skill set and stay curious about how you can do that. And you're going to be you're going to be well positioned, not only against your colleagues and other people applying for the same job, but yes, also against the AIs.
And that ties in well to one of your earlier points in this podcast was that as a leader, it was very important or is very important to have that wide array of skill sets so you can understand and talk and respect to each of your team members. So I love how that kind of ties in to the beginning of the conversation of what it takes to lead a team of creatives.
Well, and I view AI as one of the members of the team. So I know the strengths of AI and I know the limitations of AI. And so just like I know the strengths and limitations of everyone else on my team, I wouldn't ask my, videographer to write an email and I wouldn't ask my writer to create a podcast.
Right.
Like I wouldn't do those things, just like I wouldn't ask ChatGPT to write, an email in the voice of our CEO, but I would ask it to spit out a to-do list for the day based on my cluttered notes that I have.
Yeah.
There's just different uses of it. So if you view it as a teammate, but you view it as any other member of the team, that you would, elevate them in certain ways and understand their limitations in others.
And you talk about understanding the limitations of AI and their strengths and weaknesses. Let's kind of think about the concerns, specifically ethical concerns or copyright, right? Concerns. What are some of that you have in your field?
Yeah, I think ethical concerns have been, I think actually the ethical concerns about AI have been around much longer than the more, publicly accessible AI really has been. But, we know that because it is a predictive model, because it pulls from what's existing on the internet, there are ethical implications of it being biased, of, because it pulls from what's the highest volume on the internet. A very basic example is if I asked, Midjourney or something to create a picture, an illustration, whatever, of a business owner, it's probably going to be a white man 9 times out of 10. 9.9 times out of 10 it's going to be. Same thing with if I asked, to create a persona for some kind of brand marketing thing, it's probably going to be a white man. Like, it just is. If I ask it to describe a family, it's probably going to be mom, dad, and 2 kids.
Right.
There's just certain things, and that's, we know this, and you can look into a lot more research about it, but AI is inherently problematic ethically because there is embedded racism because of who's created the internet, right? I mean, the internet was created by a privileged majority group, right? And even though it's been populated over time, even when you just put something into the search engine, you can see what I mean if you're not, versed in the ethical considerations of AI. But if you put something into search, again, using the example, if you put into Google search business owner and you click images, you're going to see the same guy 100 times, and you're probably going to have to scroll to page 10 to find a woman and page 12 to find a black woman. It's just, that's how it works. So when you understand that the way that AI works is by pulling from that search engine and pulling from the database, well, of course, what follows is that what it pulls is going to have the same implicit biases that the internet on the whole does.
Right. So it's that education that's important to even the prompt engineers out there, right? Let's make sure we are diverse in our language when we're prompting too, right? So that it just doesn't choose what's out there for a majority in the universe.
Well, it's like, again, like this was years ago, but there all of a sudden came to light ethical considerations about standardized testing and SATs and, things like that, because every single question had to do with a very small, narrow group. And you always had, if Bobby splits a pizza with his friend Sarah, like but it's never, if Tyrell splits a pizza with his friend, it's just, there's things. And when you don't have the inclusive language or you don't have the inclusive imagery, people don't feel seen, and they don't, there's a limitation to how they can interact with that content. So you are doing yourself a disservice if you rely solely, as a marketer, if you rely solely on what AI is spitting out, because you're limiting your audience to what the internet has decided is the most important, and the most important is never, ever, ever the most inclusive.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. All right, so now I want to switch gears, talking about this podcast, the AI Wave, with a little bit of Rhode Island. Specifically, where do you see Rhode Island having an advantage, or where Rhode Island, how Rhode Island can become this leader in this AI revolution? What makes our ocean state so great that we can take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity?
Well, I think the funny thing about Rhode Island is that we're so small that things catch fire really quickly. Yeah. So if you can start passion about something, it will catch on. And I think we've seen that. I've seen that personally in community groups that I've helped found and be a part of, is that, once people catch on to a trend, they get really into it. And you can kind of see that in all areas of this state in terms of entrepreneurship and business. Like, we have a super successful food scene. We have a really successful food truck scene. Small businesses thrive here because when people catch on to a trend, they love it and they support it. Businesses that I'm sure wouldn't survive in bigger cities survive here because people in Rhode Island are fiercely loyal to the things that they latch onto. So I think it's interesting because AI really does have that potential to be really successful here, because if one person starts saying this is great, word of mouth passes it around. And maybe that's it, is that Rhode Island is one of the last, like, I think, places where word of mouth is probably more powerful than any other medium.
We're so dense.
We're so dense. It's such a dense population.
Population dense.
Well, sure. It depends on the part of the state you're in, But yeah, I think it is one of the unique things about Rhode Island is that you can say, check this out, and people really will. And then they'll tell their friend to check it out, and then their friend will check it out, and then their other friend will check it out. And then by the time a month passes, you're all at the same place going, oh, you checked it out. Great. And I think we can do that with something like AI too. And again, small state, a lot of potential. We're the creative capital. We have RISD in this state. We have one of the best art schools in the country here. We have a super successful, the small businesses here thrive. There's just a lot of things, I think, about Rhode Island that make it uniquely poised to experiment and latch on and really be the start of something great.
Let's do it. Let's do it, Rhode Island. Let's be the leaders in this AI revolution. This conversation, thank you so much for your time, Shannon. Tell the folks, how can they get in touch with you? What can they follow? And you mentioned some of your other groups and organizations and nonprofits that you're on. What are some of those?
You can follow the podcast, Sex Ed Debunked, at Sex Ed Debunked across all socials. You can follow Rhode Island Queer Community Project, a new nonprofit that I'm the co-founder of. That's at Rhode Island Community Project, I think. It's RIQCP. You can search it. Queers and Beers of Rhode Island is another community group founded. That's at Queers and Beers of RI on Instagram and all the other socials. You can find me on LinkedIn, Shannon Curley, and I also have a Wix page. That's Shannon Writes Stuff. .wix.
How do they spell right? How do you spell right?
Like right, but it's a good double entendre.
I like that.
I'm always surprising myself with wordplay.
Well, this was great. Great wordplay here today. I learned a lot. Hopefully you learned a lot as well. We appreciate you taking your time with us, Shannon.
Yeah, happy to ride in the wave.
All right, that's all we have for you on this week on the AI Wave. Don't forget to give us a follow on our social media accounts and a subscribe right here on YouTube. And while you're here, please like and comment what you thought of today's episode. What was your favorite comment? What was your favorite quote? Let us know. We love interacting with you. I'm your host, Chris Parisi. Thank you so much for taking the time to listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode of AI Wave.